Good evening, everyone. My name is Karim Atif, and I am the chair of the IIRSM branch in Egypt. Welcome to the fourth IIRSM branch meeting in Egypt. Our guest speaker today is Andy Farrell. Andy is both a fellow member of the IIRSM, and he is a chartered member of the IOSH. He also holds membership of the Institute of Industrial Accident Investigators, a membership of the Institute of Leadership and Management, and he is accredited as a health and safety consultant with the UK Occupational Safety and Health Consultants Register. During his career as a health and safety specialist, he has undertaken a wide range of consultancy and training projects, including an investigation into the potential legal liabilities arising from the collapse of a building while undergoing refurbishment in central London, acting in this case as advisor to the Defence Counsel, an investigation into the circumstances surrounding a near-fatal accident on a large construction site. Prior to entering the health and safety field, he spent some years in specialist investigator roles with 2 UK law enforcement agencies, complex multinational inquiries in which he was involved, including acting as a UK liaison officer with the US Customs Service on an investigation into international product counterfeiting. Not does he therefore have a wealth of practical experience in investigative interviewing, but he has also written a book on this specialist subject, Investigative Interviewing, a Practical Guide for Managers. So our agenda for today's meeting will be, firstly, I will speak about our branch updates. After that, we will listen to Andy Farrell, who will be presenting on instant interviewing. Finally, there is a Q&A session. So if you have any question regarding to the instant interviewing, feel free to submit the question box, and we will answer all your questions before the end of the meeting. So our branch updates, the IIRSM newsletters. IIRSM support their members to make a positive impact through the following: sharing of information and knowledge, offering professional development opportunities, and providing industry and risk insights. Part of this happening through the weekly IIRSM newsletters. IIRSM is sending 4 different newsletters on monthly basis, which are the IIRSM Update, Diary, Focus, and Insight. The IIRSM Update, which offers news and reviews and advice from the world of risk and safety. The IIRSM Diary, which features dates of all upcoming events, training, and CPD opportunities for the IIRSM member to learn and develop. And the IIRSM Insight, which discuss the current thinking on strategy and leadership in the world of risk and safety. For example, we will have a piece on diversity or communication. The IIRSM Focus, which provides a spotlight from a senior professional on today's risk and safety topics. Like we will have one on security or well-being. So those newsletters are sent via email to all IIRSM members. So if you are an IIRSM member, make sure to check your emails to be updated. Regarding to the future branch meeting, the IIRSM Egypt branch meeting, as we said before, will be delivered on monthly basis. The next meeting will be on the 14th of December. The topic and the speaker will be confirmed shortly. Regarding to the CPD and training opportunities, we will have a lot. Firstly, the IIRSM will deliver an online training course, which is Managing Risk Essentials. The duration of the course is 4 hours, which is split into 2 consecutive days. The course will be on the 16th and 17th of November from 9 to 11 UK time. For more information about the course and the booking, Donna will share that in the chat box. Also, the IIRSM will deliver a professional development event on the 16th of November. Kate Field will be presenting on managing the psychological health and safety and well-being in the workplace, an introduction to ISO 45003. Also, for more information about the event, Donna will share the link in the chat box. And the IIRSM also will deliver an online half-day interactive workshop, which will run through the 6 stages to develop a well-being strategy. And by the end of the course, you will leave with a plan of development areas and practical actions to implement in your organization. This workshop will be on the 30th of November. Also, Donna will share the link in the chat box. Regarding to the international branch meetings, there will be 3 upcoming international branch meetings delivered in November. The first one is an India branch meeting, which will be on the 18th of November. The second one is Qatar branch meeting, which will be on the 23rd of November. And the third one is Nigeria branch meeting, which will be on the 26th of November. Regarding to the UK branch meetings, there will be also 3 upcoming UK branch meetings will be delivered in November. The first one is West Midlands branch meeting, which will be on the 11th of November. Carl Cooper will be presenting on health and safety within the Army. The second one is Northwest branch meeting, which will be on the 17th of November. The third one is London branch meeting, which will be on the 26th of November. So you can visit the IIRSM website to find more information about the mentioned meetings, along with how to register and book your place in. Finally, regarding to the other CPD opportunities that the Egypt branch will offer, we will deliver a webinar on the 23rd of November at 7 p.m. Egypt time. Ahmed Gamal will be the speaker, and he will be presenting on selecting respirators for your workplace. And this webinar will be delivered in Arabic. So that's the update regarding to our branch. So now I will hand over the meeting to Andy Farrell, who will be presenting on instant interviewing.
Lovely. Thank you, Kareem. Is my screen showing okay?
It's not yet.
How's that?
Yeah.
There we go. You can't beat the technology. Right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining the presentation. I appreciate it. The topic tonight we're talking about is incident interviewing, which is a major part of any investigative process. You collect information, but you've got to talk to the people involved to find out what really happened. So that is why you interview. You want to establish the facts so you prevent recurrence of the incident. So contrary to what some people believe, the idea of the interview is not to go and find somebody to blame. It is to find out what happened so you can find the fault, you can stop the thing happening again. It's most important. Now, you may find somebody who you think can be blamed as you go along, but that's not the end of things. I mean, whether they're to blame or not is a matter for others to decide. You're the investigator, not as the manager. And if you stop the investigation when you found somebody you think is to blame, you're making a major error. For a start, there's a lot of hot debate in academic circles about exactly what is meant by human error. So you may think they're to blame, but in fact, maybe they're not. But if you stop the investigation at that point, then the problem is there are a lot of questions that are unanswered, and you may be missing the point completely. For example, you haven't actually found the cause of the accident. You don't know, for example, whether the person was trained, to do the job they were asked to do? If they weren't trained, was it their fault? Maybe that's where the problem lies. If they were trained, was the training suitable and without errors? And that's not as silly as it sounds. I came across one case involving an airline accident where an aircraft crashed, everybody died. It turned out that the first officer carried out a procedure which he thought was correct because it's what he'd used on other types of aircraft he's qualified to fly. But for this particular kind of aircraft, it was actually a fatal mistake, and he just qualified for this aircraft. It turned out that the information about that change in procedure was not in his training course. He didn't know. So he carried out what he thought was the right procedure. It turned out to be the wrong procedure because of flawed training. You've got to ask yourself, if they did carry out a recommended procedure, did the procedure actually work? And if it didn't, was it their fault? You've got to check into all that as well. And you've also got the situation, they may have done what they could to prevent the accident happening, but maybe there simply wasn't a procedure in place anyway. And it's not their fault, but there is a major problem that needs to be investigated. If you stop as soon as you found a name to put on the report, it's his fault, you'll never find out about the lack of training or the problems in training, problems in procedures, and so on. So this accident is going to happen again. The other major problem about just stopping as soon as you find somebody who appears to be blameworthy is that staff are going to get the impression that all you're trying to do is to penalize people. And if that is what they think, then, well, they're just not going to cooperate, are they? If they are brought in for an interview, you can almost guarantee that responses will be on the line of, I don't know, I can't remember, I was talking to somebody and wasn't looking in that direction. Nobody will know anything about what happened because they do not want to get involved. They do not want to risk being blamed. So it's important to interview, but you've got to have the right objective in mind. It's to find out the facts. Another question we've got to think about is, why would somebody want to lie anyway? Or if they're not lying, why are they being reluctant to tell the truth or to accept what happened? And there can be a number of reasons. It could be that they fear being sanctioned, in other words, being punished by the company, even though they honestly believed at the time they'd done the best they could with the incident. Bearing in mind training problems, procedural problems, they felt they had done what they could, and yet they're going to get blamed. So they're going to give a different version. They're going to try and steer away from it. It may be that the person actually feels guilty about what happened. They know deep down that they made a mistake, that they did something they shouldn't have done. But because of what happened, they may not even be able to accept it. They've got in their mind a different version of events because they cannot face up to reality because it's too horrible. It's unreal. And this is something that's known as the second victim effect. So they just don't want to talk about it, and they will skate around the problems, that they will not discuss it if they can avoid it. A person might be reluctant to tell you what happened because, rightly or wrongly, they're trying to protect somebody else. They may feel that their colleague, as I say, rightly or wrongly, is going to get into trouble, and so they're trying to protect them. They won't say what really happened. And a problem you've got to think about, and this is, I think, the personal view, but in situations where you've got bonus schemes in operation, they might fear reprisal from the other staff or the managers even. You may have a scenario where something's happened, somebody's been injured, and the manager or the supervisor has got the team together and decided, right, this is what we're going to say. This is what happened. It's not what really happened, but it's something to do to try and protect their bonus or to protect themselves from being blamed. And so this person has got to go along with it. They don't agree with it, they're not comfortable with it, but if they change direction, if they tell you what really happened, they're going to face backlash from their colleagues. So they're caught in the middle. So they don't want to lie, but really they feel they've got no option. So you've got all these factors running in the background. These are possibilities that could affect what somebody's going to say to you. Okay, so that's the background to why I want to investigate and the sort of problems we may face. You've therefore got to plan for the interview. And the first thing is you have to maintain an open mind. It's a serious mistake to go into an interview if you believing that you know what happened, because it's going to affect the way you listen to what you're being told. It'll affect the interpretation you put on it. So you have to have an open mind, and basically you go where the evidence leads you. Surprising that evidence may be, makes no difference. If it takes you down a certain road, that's where you're going to go. You've got to figure out who you're going to interview, in what order, and why are you going to interview these persons, these particular people? What have they got that you need to know? What do you think they can add to the mix? So have that in your mind. Of course, in the interview, that all may change. If they suddenly reveal something you weren't aware of, then you may need to change direction. So you've got to be flexible. But initially, you start off with a plan. Then, how are they likely to behave? So you're on your guard for this. It may be they're going to be very upset and will need a lot of counseling almost. They may be aggressive. They may be just not cooperative. They just do not want to get involved. So you've got to be prepared for this and think of how you're going to deal with each individual, because they are individuals with their own problems and their own characteristics. Will they need any support? Maybe psychological, if they're gone through a traumatic event, or maybe something as simple as language. If they're a foreign worker, then are you interviewing them in their mother tongue? Or are you interviewing them in a foreign language, which they may not be that familiar with? So they get along day by day, but discussing things in detail and the nuances of what happened, they may struggle. So you might even need to use an interpreter. It's something to think about. Think about the room layout. Do you want a formal layout or an informal layout? Now, what I mean by that is a formal layout is where you've got you be in the chair behind the desk and they sit the other side. So there's a physical barrier between you, but that shows sort of authority, if you like. The other way of doing it is the more informal approach. So maybe you've got two chairs more or less facing each other with a coffee table to one side with your notes on. So it's more relaxed. There's no psychological barrier, so they can talk to you more easily. It all depends on the way you want the interview to go as to how it's going to be done. But you want a room that's quiet, that's away from the incident, with no distractions, no windows they can look out of. It's where you can focus on the task in hand. But formal or informal, that's a choice you've got to make depending how you want to run the interview. One final thing to think about in the planning stage is the documentation. You don't want to go into the interview and then suddenly realize that you wanted to show them a photograph of the scene, but you haven't got it with you. It's in the next office in the file, and you've got to break the whole flow of the interview to go out, get this document, bring you back, and so on. So what you need to have as part of your planning, all the paperwork you may need, be that documents, copies of statements, forms, whatever, all in a folder which you take in with you, and then you can produce them carefully and quietly as the interview progresses. It just makes things smoother, it looks more professional, and it doesn't break the train of thought if they're trying to think of what happened and what they're telling you. So the documentation with you is an important point. So, okay, you've got your plan, you've got the room sorted out. Now you've got the witness coming in to talk to you. And the odds are they're going to be nervous, if not even frightened. Depends what happened. So your job is to establish rapport with them at the very beginning. So you want to sit them down, get them relaxed, maybe get them a cup of coffee or a drink, just and talk to them quietly for a few minutes just to settle their nerves, because they're going to be nervous. Certainly, when it comes to active investigation, you've got to really think about their mental state. You have a duty of care to these people. Whether or not it's in your legislation, you've got it morally. You've got to look after their welfare, both physical and mental. And if they've just seen a serious accident, or maybe they've lost a colleague or somebody's been badly injured, they could be in shock, they could be traumatized. You've got to take that into account. You've got to be sensitive to the way they are. So you frame your questions accordingly. Just think about how these people are feeling. So to settle them down, you explain the purpose of the interview, and you make it clear you're not there to find somebody to punish or to blame. You are simply there on behalf of management to collect the facts. Why? Because you want to stop this happening to somebody else some other time. So we're all on the same side. You've got the key to what happened. Give it to me. We can stop people being injured. So you're going to work as part of a team. That's the idea. Now, crucially, what I'd ask you to do is to take a mental note of how they behave when they've quietened down, when they've relaxed somewhat. And we're thinking here about whether they look you in the eye when they're talking to you, how rapidly they answer the questions. Are they fidgeting? Are they sitting in the chair looking relaxed? What's the tone of voice? Now, why we're doing this will become evident later on as we go through the presentation, but you need to get this baseline note of how they're behaving before you start the interview going. You want to know how they normally behave. So you set them at ease and you're going to start the interview. Now, let's just touch upon a few mistakes which are often made. First thing is using a panel to interview the witness. Not a good idea. It may be very formal, like a board of inquiry, but it's extremely intimidating for the witness, which is not going to help. And you can find that unless they're well structured and well experienced in this, the different members of the panel can actually be talking across each other and will be talking across purposes, which just leads to confusion. So it should really be a one-to-one interview. Don't interrupt the witness when they're answering a question. You may have something you desperately want to ask them, but let them finish what they're saying. I always teach that you work on the basis of you've got two ears and you've got one mouth. So you should use them in that ratio. Listen twice as much as you talk, because you want to listen. You want them to be talking. The more they talk, the more you get out of the interview. Resist the urge to be aggressive or triumphant or sarcastic. Aha, I've got you. You've made a mistake. Now you're mine. That is a terrible mistake to make. If you've got somebody who knows they're lying and knows you realize it and is trying to get out of the interview, all you've got to do is give them this excuse to say, that's not really how you should speak to me. I'm not going to stand for that. That's not right. And they walk out of the room apparently in indignation. You've just given them the excuse to walk out of the room, which is not a good idea. I actually did an exercise on a training course where somebody made that mistake. I was talking to it turned out to be the person who caused the accident, and a colleague, because we had to interview as a panel, which was not the best way of doing it. A younger colleague jumped in and made some sarcastic comment, and immediately the witness said, "You can't speak to me like that," and he walked out. He admitted later on in debrief that I almost had him. I had him in a corner and he knew he had nowhere to go. And then my colleague made that silly comment. He had the excuse to walk out. So be careful about mannerisms. Be professional at all times. Don't ask multiple questions, which is what a lot of people do. Questions like, who sent you to the office, and when you got to the office, was it locked, or did you have to get the key off somebody? Well, that's 3 different questions. So at best, you're going to confuse them. And if they're trying to hide something, they're simply going to pick the easiest question to answer and hope you forget about the other ones. So keep the questions simple and straightforward, one at a time. Don't ask what are called leading questions. In other words, these are questions which suggest the expected answer. You know, did you see Fred driving the forklift truck? That suggests that you're expecting to be told, yes, it was Fred. So for various reasons, somebody might just go, yeah, oh yeah, it was Fred, yeah. You know, maybe they just want to get out of the room, so they'll tell you what they think you want to hear, and that's it, away they go. But they're giving you the wrong information. So you ask them questions like, did you see who was driving the forklift? And if they did see them, did you recognize that person? Who was it? You know, which is a lot easier way of doing it. So just be aware of those common mistakes. Think before you ask the questions. An important thing, a really important thing to bear in mind is that this is an interview. It is not an interrogation, and there's a big, big difference between the two. An interrogation is a one-way flow of information. The interrogator has certain questions and he wants specific answers. He's not interested in what else is going on, what other excuses there may be, other information. He doesn't care. He's got a set of questions. He wants a set of answers. And he's probably got in the back of his mind the answers which he thinks he should be getting. So it's not exactly a balanced way of doing things. An interview, on the other hand, is a two-way flow. The investigator listens more, as I've said already, 2 ears, 1 mouth. He listens more than he talks. He wants information. He wants to hear what's being said. He wants to know what the person knows. So it is a two-way cooperative thing rather than I'm telling you, you tell me the answers. That's the interrogation. Wrong way of doing it. Now, there are many different ways of doing an interview. There's different techniques. Even the police have got different, or used to have different ones. They've got a standardized approach now. The one I would prefer, and which I feel most comfortable using, is a technique known as conversation management. This was developed, I think, in the 1970s, was it? By a psychologist working for London, for the Metropolitan Police in London. And it is essentially a conversation. So it's done in 3 phases. So first of all, you've got the witness phase. The witness tells you their story in their own words. They take their time, they use their own words, which is fine. You don't rush them at doing this. The only time that the interviewer will interrupt here is if they're drifting off the topic, as some people can do. They start talking about things that aren't really relevant. So you want to steer them back onto topic. But otherwise, just let them get on with it. Talk. The more they're talking, the more information that you're getting out of them. Once they've finished, then you move to this stage 2, phase 2, which is the clarification stage. Now, what happens here is that the interviewer will ask the person about what they've said. It may be something wasn't very clear, so they want to clarify that. What did you mean by that? You said you were talking to somebody. Can you remind me who that was? And it may be they want to expand upon something. So they said they were doing something or heard something. What did you hear? You know, I heard a shout was the original part, the original statement. I heard somebody shouting. So expanding on that would be, Okay, did you hear what was said? How was it said? Were they angry? Were they frightened? Were they laughing? Did you hear the words? Could you identify the person? So you're getting the fine detail of, I heard somebody shouting. And that's what you do in this stage. You're looking for the fine detail. You're ticking the box to see you've got everything you possibly can. Now, in most cases, the two phases, that's all you're going to need, because not everybody's going to come in there lying. So most people are trying to be helpful, especially an accident. They're trying to be helpful. They're telling you what happened. They're giving you the story. They're doing the best they can, and you're helping them to get the detail out of the story. So once they've finished, then you don't need to go to phase 3. You just simply close the interview down courteously. Thank you very much. What I would suggest at that stage, it would depend on circumstances, but what I would suggest is that you actually then take a written statement from them. Taking statements is another technique in its own right, like interviewing. And there's the right way of doing it, and there's the wrong way of doing it. We can't really talk about it now because we don't really have the time to go into that. But I would just say, as a quick hint, don't make the mistake that so many people make of saying to the witness, great, can you just write down what you've told me? It seems the quickest way. It's certainly initially very quick, and it seems all right, but the odds are they will forget to put things in, or they'll put them in the wrong way. They're not very useful. There are better ways of doing it. But whatever you do, you really need a statement. They've given you their evidence, so now you need it written down, so you got it on record to what was said. And then you can analyze it later on as you need to. So for most people, they're not lying. So phase 1, they tell you their story. Phase 2, you clarify it and tease out the additional detail. And that's it. Move on to statement, and away you go. There is, however, a third phase available to you, and that's what's called a challenge phase. But this, and I do stress this, you only use this if the witness seems to be lying, they seem to be changing their story all the time for some reason, or they're just not trying to give you a straight answer. You're asking them certain things and they're dodging around it. One could say almost like a politician, because they never give straight answers. If that's happening, then you start to think, no, there's something going on here. There's something, for whatever reason, they are trying to hide. And so therefore you go to the challenge phase, where you're going to start drilling down into what they've said to find out, does it actually stand up to examination or not? It's important, and I put this in red deliberately. Remember, the person might be lying, but remember, there are many reasons why they could be lying. So if you challenge them, if you feel you've got to challenge them, do it with compassion. Think about the fact they could be traumatized. Think about the fact they could be under duress, and they're doing this because somebody said they've got to. They're not doing it willingly. So treat them with respect. Don't just think, right, you're lying to me, it's now a competition and I'm going to beat you down. That is the wrong way to do it. It's a person you're talking to. Have respect for that. The best type of questions to ask if you go into this challenge phase are what are called open questions. Now, essentially, you've got open and you've got closed. A closed question is one that can be answered essentially yes or no, such as, is it raining? Well, it's yes or it's not. It's as simple as that. There's a simple yes, no, there's no way to go with that. An open question is one that requires them to give you more information in return. They can't just answer yes, no. The closed questions do have their uses, but it's far better to use open questions where you can. And it may sometimes sound difficult. Or how am I going to ask an open question? What am I going to do to try and get them to give me information? I would recommend this acronym, TEDS Pie. And I've even put a photograph of pie in there to help you along. TEDS Pie stands for the opening phrases. Tell me, explain to me, describe to me, show me, precisely, in detail, exactly. Now, those are the key phrases, and you can mix and match those to your heart's content to suit your style and to suit the context of the question. And of course, it's not a straightforward tell me. You can start off, oh, would you mind telling me? Well, they've got to tell you something. They've got to give you information. Could you tell me in detail what you were doing? Could you describe to me exactly how this process works? Could you explain to me what you meant exactly by that comment? Okay, so you're mixing and matching, but you put them into a way that's polite, it's friendly, but you are getting them to give you information. They can't just do a yes, no. And the key thing is that the more information they give you, then the more information you've got to work on, the clearer things should become. So where possible, stick to TEDS Pie or a similar approach to that, but use open questions. But as I say, the ones to try and avoid are the closed questions that got limited use. The leading question is pointless because you could end up they're giving you the answer they think you want and not the real answer. And multiple questions, which are done in haste, can actually be very confusing because they may dodge half the question anyway. So it's best to take your time and ask open questions in the right order. And that should get you to where you want to go. Now, let's just think for a minute about honesty. Because the question is often raised, well, is that person lying? Well, lying is almost a matter of debate, really. To begin with, it's common that people will make mistakes in general conversation. So talking to, I last saw him on Tuesday. No, I tell a lie. I saw him on Monday. So when he told you he saw you on Tuesday, he was actually telling you something was wrong. Does that mean he was lying? No, he simply made a mistake. And this is quite normal when people are talking. They will get things back to front. They will get terms and names confused occasionally. It's part of normal dialogue. It's the way people speak. And of course, what doesn't happen when they're talking about things that have happened before is that people don't normally have perfect recall. So they're trying to put it together in their mind. They will get things back to front. They will forget details and then remember later on, oh, I should have mentioned. So the fact they're actually telling the truth precisely, it doesn't mean they're lying. It could simply be that they're making a mistake. But this idea that they don't have perfect recall, it's important to bear in mind when the witness is giving you their evidence. Because if they sort of recite the story without stumbling, without having to go back and correct something, without having to think about it, then they may be a very good witness. Keep an open mind, could be a very good witness, or it might be that they've actually rehearsed that story in their mind. And so now they've got it off pat, they can just trot it out quite happily. So it pays to be a little suspicious sometimes, but an open mind. Some people are very good witnesses, other people stumble around. It's the way they are. Remember also, as said, people may be deceitful against their will. If they've been leaned on by their colleagues or their managers to go along with a joint story, then yes, they're lying in that they are telling you an untruth, but they're not doing it deliberately. They're doing it because they're forced to. So whether you say they're being dishonest, I think that's a philosophical point. You know, they're saying what they have to say, not because they believe it. So you've got to think about their circumstances. So to test if somebody is being honest, is giving you a straight account of what happened, remember that, as I say, the devil is in the detail. Yeah. So most people, if they're going to lie, unless they're very, very good or they're professional spies or whatever, they won't have a full, as they call it, a backstory. They'll have got an excuse or a version of events, but they won't have really thought about it. So when you get to the challenge phase, to phase 3, and you start to dig into their story, what you do is to use open questions and use it gently, but you're pressing them for details. For example, somebody says, oh, I didn't actually see the accident because I was talking to somebody. Well, it's reasonable to say, who were you talking to? Yeah. Now, the odds are they've not thought about that. If they're lying, they won't have thought about it. So now they've got a problem. Do they retract what they said and come up with something else on the run? Or do they throw a name into the mix and hope that they can get to that person before you do? Because the odds are you're going to ask the other person to confirm the conversation. They can't take that chance. So now you start to put them under pressure. Now the cracks are starting to appear. And it's this sort of thing you do. You just look for the detail and ask them for the details. It's a normal thing to do, but if they're lying, it's going to put them under pressure. And the more lies that they tell now to try and fill in the gaps, then it means the more they've got to remember. And so it's a greater the chance they're going to trip themselves up. Because if you think about it, they're trying to remember what really happened. They're trying to remember their version of what happened, i.e. the lies. Now they're trying to remember what else was said to cover the lies that weren't properly covered in the first place. And all the time you're asking them more questions. And it just doesn't stop. So you put them under a lot of pressure. You're not trying to be cruel or brutal, but it's simply testing their story. And eventually their story is going to break down. So the more you ask the questions, then if they are lying, the more gaps they've got to fill and the more difficult it becomes for them. Another technique which I've come across, which sounds quite bizarre, but actually there's good reason behind it. And it works for all witnesses, not just those you think are lying, but for all of them. Ask them to tell the story backwards. So in other words, rather than start, I went in the office, this happened, blah, 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 and then the incident, start at the incident and work backwards. And the reason you want them to do that is that they've got to concentrate. And by concentrating, they may well recall more information. Just an example of that. Take say the alphabet, the English alphabet, A, B, C, D, and so on. Most people can rattle it off at high speed, going from A to Z. Ask them to do Z to A, and it'll take them more time. Try it yourself. It's unusual. You're not used to working in reverse. It's Z, Y, X, W, V. You're going to slow down because you have to think about it. And that's what you want the witness to do, is to think about what happened. And in thinking, they may well come across more information, which they didn't give you first time round, but you're getting it second time round. So that's what you do. And you do that in the second phase, where you're actually trying to glean the detail out of. But of course, it will also work if somebody is deceiving you. And what will happen is they've now got this story which they've sort of worked out in their mind, but it's got full of holes. They don't realize that. But now they've got to recite the story backwards. they've got to remember what happened, what really happened, what they say happened, any lies they've told, tell the whole thing in reverse, and at the same time answer more questions and possibly generate more lies without appearing to be hesitating. That puts them under an awful lot of pressure. Now, it may even be by doing that, I don't guarantee it at all, but you may get to a situation where the person realizes that they're digging such a big hole, it really isn't worth carrying on. And they may actually stop and make an admission. Actually, no, I'll tell you what happened. I've had it happen to me once in a criminal investigation where I was interviewing a suspect at that time, and I didn't believe him, and he knew I didn't believe him. And I kept gently, with open questions, gently poking holes in what he was saying. And he was putting up, bless him, he put up a vehement defense. It wasn't me, I didn't know anything about it, I don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, we've been going for a while, halfway through yet another denial, he stopped dead in his tracks and said, yeah, okay, I give up, you've got me. And he admitted it. Doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. But it's when they realize that they've dug such a big hole, they can't get out of it, and it's pointless carrying on. And that may happen. But what you can do, even if that does actually happen to you, if you realize, and again, this is where compassion comes in, you realize they're struggling, that the more questions you ask them, testing their information, the more the cracks appear, the more bits keep falling off, the hole gets bigger and so on. And they're going to realize as well. So you can, in effect, take mercy on them. Pause the interview. When you're happy, you know what's going on, that they are definitely lying. Then you can actually pause the interview and say, right, then, let's just take a breath here. Let's just look at what we've got so far. And then what you can do is to go through, in summary, the problems you're finding with their evidence. You said A, then you said B. I can't get those two to match up. You said you were here, and then you said you're over there. And again, I can't see how that works. Maybe it's me, but I just can't see it. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Once you lay your cards out like that, you can then say to them, look, have a think about it. Is there any way we can sort this out? Any way we can explain all this? Give them a chance, and then you open the door to them. We'll carry on the interview, but before we do, is there anything you want to tell me? Now, you're not forcing an admission from them. You're not trying to trip them. But what you are doing is saying to them, there is a way to stop this. Just tell me what actually happened. But it's their choice. If they refuse, if they close that door in your face, then so be it. You carry on. And what I would suggest at that point, you basically close the interview and you take a statement from them. And then that can be used later on. But you point out to them, you may well want to re-interview them at a later stage, depending upon what you've found. But at any point, if they want to come and talk to you about it, you're willing to listen. So the door remains open. You don't want to force admissions out of people, but you're asking them, you're giving them an opportunity to make an admission if they choose. If they don't choose, so be it. Okay, how are we doing on time, Kareem? Are you okay? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, lovely. Sorry, Kareem suddenly popped up there. I thought, hello, he's going to give me a time check. Right. So that's the point. We're testing the information. You've got to do it with compassion, with professionalism. Don't torture them. When it's obvious they're struggling, they're drowning, stop, throw them a lifebelt and see what happens. Now, another way of testing honesty, and this is an interesting field, but it can lead to so many problems, is working with body language. In other words, how a person is reacting. It is a vital tool. It's a very valuable tool, but it can backfire if you don't actually know what you're doing. You can very easily make mistakes if you're not trained in body language. I have an interest in it, but I'm by no means an expert in it. But I like to watch out occasionally to see what's happening. There are a lot of urban myths about body language. For example, the idea that somebody will not look you directly in the eye if they're lying to you. Wrong. US research shows that it all depends how good a liar they are. They've done various studies. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Depends on the person. Another myth is that a liar will give themselves away by licking their lips. The idea is that lying produces adrenaline, which dries the mouth, which makes you lick your lips. So the physiology is perfect. The problem is that somebody who's honest, but is thirsty and wants a cup of coffee, will also lick their lips. So you can very easily misunderstand. It's the changes you're looking for. And that's why I said at the very beginning, look at how they behave and then see how they behave when you question them. But bear in mind, crucially, a change in their body language doesn't prove they're lying. It simply is a potential indicator that they're under stress. But why they're under stress, that's still got to be determined. But it's just indication of stress, not of lying. Also, you're not looking for a single change in body language, like, or previously you looked me in the eye and he answered, but now he's looking away when he answered that question. That's not enough. You want a cluster of changes, such as he looked away and his voice dropped and he was hesitating when he answered me. Okay, that's not what he normally does. Maybe there's something going on, but be very careful with body language because it can backfire on you very easily unless you're specifically trained in using it. So that's just a quick summary. Basically, the difference in a routine disciplinary and an action investigation is that you're talking an action investigation to people who may well have been involved in a traumatic incident or seen a traumatic incident and been upset by it. So you've got to have even more concern for and compassion for their mental state. That's important. You've got to think about their mental health and welfare, so you adjust the tone and the tempo accordingly. You know, because ultimately, yes, you need to find out what happened to avoid it happening again, and that's important. But it's not so important that you're going to risk damaging somebody's psychological health by pressurizing them, by badgering them, by letting them think it was all their fault and building guilt upon them. That's not what you want to do. You know, you've got to find it is the test of your skill as an interviewer is to get to the facts without causing any more damage. If you can do that, then you're doing a good job. Okay, well, there we have it. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. There's a lot of things involved with instant interviewing, and it lack of time, I've only touched on a couple of points. A lot of other things I could talk about, but I hope it's been a good introduction for you. If you think I would be of more help to you or your organization, that's great. There's my email address there. Please feel free to drop me a line, have a chat. There's no charge for a chat, I never do. And also, if what I've said has whetted your appetite, then as was mentioned in the introduction, I've actually written a handbook on it, on this topic. And a lot of what we've got in this presentation is taken out of that handbook. And that's investigative interviewing. It's a very pretty cover. I didn't design it, a friend did. Did a very good job of doing that. So you can buy that online directly from, it's a print on demand book. So you just place your, not through me, but through my mail, using the link at the bottom, and away you go. As I say, I've enjoyed the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've still got 87 people there, so that's good. Nobody went. So I shall hand it back to Karim again with my thanks. Hope you enjoyed things. So over to you, Karim. I'll switch off my screen.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. So Donna, if we have, I think we have a lot of questions. So Donna, we do.
We do. Thank you, Andy. I think it's been a really enjoyable session. People seem to be having quite a lot of questions that they want to ask you. So we'll just start off from Abdullah. Is it recommended to set a checklist for interview?
Yeah, you can have a personal checklist. No harm in that. So looking at things, as I've mentioned, like the room, who you want to interview, why, what information you need, how you're going to take statements. Yeah, and just have a brief checklist, tick off the boxes so you don't forget anything. You go into the interview knowing what it is you want to do. Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you. And then we've got two questions from Tony Wood. The first question is, would you advise that the interview be recorded to allow for listening back?
I'm sorry, you broke off there. Would I advise?
That the interview be recorded to allow for listening back.
Yes, I would. Note taking is very important. That's something I couldn't touch upon. But I would suggest, where possible, rather than have to take written notes all the time, if you have a small digital recorder and you record the interview, then yeah, it avoids confusion later. People said, oh, I didn't say that. That's not what I meant. You've got the actual recording to run back to, just to double check that you've understood correctly and you've got the note correct. So yeah, a recording is good. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then Tony's also asking, have you found that you may have someone who refuses to answer any question or give their account of information? And how would you encourage them to open up and provide the information that's needed?
Yes, I have had that, more in the criminal world. Somebody wouldn't even say what the date was. No comment. Another chap, we actually going to search his house and we said, are they children here so we don't frighten them? The answer was no comment. Okay, fair enough. Realistically, what I would do in a case like that, I'd point out, it's not a police interview, it's a different matter entirely. But you know, if they don't want to talk, they don't. But the interview is a chance for them to put forward their version of events. You're going in with an open mind. You want to get to the facts, but the correct facts. You're not looking for somebody to blame. So if you've misunderstood what role they may have played in this incident, then this is the ideal opportunity for them to make that clear. If they don't want to cooperate, they don't want to say anything, that's fine, that's their right. But the fact that they don't want to talk doesn't mean that you're not going to ask the questions. And while you accept and fully endorse they have a right to stay silent if they wish, entirely up to them, you've got to do a report for senior managers. And they may take a different view of these things. But, you know, it's up to you. You're the witness. I'm just laying it out for you. If you want to be quiet, that's great. I'm going to ask the questions anyway, but it's up to you. Any time you want to join in, please do so. So that's how you would do it. Respect their right, but point out that, in fact, it can be to their benefit to answer the questions.
Yeah, fantastic. Charles is asking, how do you overcome the challenge of a joint story as an investigator? So say, for example, you've got two people, you're asking them the same questions, and no matter how you ask the questions, they seem to stick to their guns with the story because they might have discussed it beforehand to get their stories aligned.
If their stories line up, then to me that suggests that they've actually fabricated it. Because as I said, people don't have perfect memories, and to have two people recite the same story almost as if they're following a script, that suggests that they've actually put something together beforehand. It's a point you can put to them. You know, you're telling me this, your colleague says exactly the same thing, uses exactly the same phrases. That's very unusual. That suggests that you may have actually put this all together. Is that what happened? If they want to deny that, so be it. But it's something that can go into your report, is that they had very, very similar accounts, and that is unusual. And then you can draw from that what you can. That they may stick to their story, that's fine. But as an investigator, if two people have got exactly the same story, or 3 or 4, the more the merrier, then that suggests that maybe a group has put a story together and they're all sticking to it.
Yeah, brilliant. Hang on. Someone is asking, how do they get training on reading body language? Or is
I'm sorry,
there
again,
such
you broke.
training?
So is that...
Oh, sorry. Is there training available on how to read body language?
Yes, I believe there is. It's an accepted thing to read body language. It's not sort of black art. It's an accepted branch of psychology, but it's not something I've done myself. What I would do, I'd do a search on Google, as you would do normally, or speak to colleagues. But if you're going to go on a course, and I've seen various courses advertised, which I know I've gone through, but I've seen them there, I would just double check the qualification of the person giving that course, make sure it's a reputable course. If it's given, say, by a university or a professional body, then it's probably a little more reliable than, say, somebody who's decided they've become an expert in body language. But yeah, it's an interesting subject. But I think there could be people out there who talk about it but don't really know a great deal. I know a little bit about it, but I know my limitations. That's why I would never try and teach it.
Yeah, no, I get that. So we've got a question from Robert. Should you gather information during an interview and prepare a statement for the person to review and sign? Should the person that you're interviewing sign their statement to say that it's an accurate account of kind of the interview?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, taking statements is a potential minefield if you get it wrong. What you would have to do essentially is, having got everything together, so you've got their story, you now go through it, but you write it down and they dictate it to you, but you keep them on course, make sure they don't drift off track. Then once they finish that, they read the statement through, the written statement. If there's anything that they want to add, alter, to delete, they have the right to do that because it's going to be their statement. And then once and only once they're happy with it, would they sign it and date it at the bottom of each page. So they're accepting that document. But yes, you write it for them, but they would actually go through the document themselves and make any alterations necessary if there were any alterations required. And then, only then, would they sign it off. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got a few questions from Mohammed. The first one is, how do you reassure the witness and make them feel safe and that they can trust you in terms of the interview?
I think by being open and honest with them. You know, forget that you are, say, a manager and they're an employee. It's a case of, we're here with a common purpose. It's been a terrible accident. You don't want it to happen again. I don't want it to happen again. And we're actually on the same side. So it's a matter of getting empathy with the person, seeing it from their point of view and being sympathetic without being over the top. So it's your skills in handling people. Can you actually get people to trust you? And you give them as much information as you can so they will trust you. You've got to be sincere in what you're saying. You know, if you are just going through the phrases, then they'll realize that you're just working off a script. You don't really mean it, and they won't believe you. If you actually mean it when you say, I'm here to try and get to the bottom to help, I'm not looking just for somebody to blame, then they should believe you.
Brilliant. And then following on from that question, is it better to investigate in a group or individually? And is it okay to have 2 investigators at the same time?
Depending on the investigation and the complexity and severity of it, you may well require a full investigation team, sort of one working the scene, one collecting evidence from elsewhere, one chasing up on the injured parties to see what happened to them, and so on, because speed is important. In terms of interviewing, you would only ever interview one person at a time on their own. If you try and interview as a group, then a number of things happen psychologically and you end up getting a group think result. They sort of all blend their answers together. So you need to have each person individually and you get their statement. And you should try and do the interview as fast as you can, because in conversation, which people are going to talk after accident about it, what can happen is that they can subconsciously absorb what somebody else has said, and then they believe that's what they saw. And I've seen this happen. In a previous career, I was in the ambulance service. I remember attending a road accident with a child, and when the police arrived, a woman in the crowd was shouting about the driver was doing this, that, and the other. And I said to the police officer, I wouldn't pay too much attention because she arrived after we did. But she'd heard other people talking, and she somehow, with emotion, had absorbed it as being the truth. So if you've got people in a group, each with their own slightly different view of things, you'll get a sort of a group response. So you've got to get them as soon as possible and take them individually.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you. We've got a question from Dean Butler.
Yeah.
So if you can't immediately visit the accident or incident site, how hard is it to perform an incident investigation remotely?
Tricky one. Ideally, you'd want to get on scene. I think the key thing is to ensure people don't move things. You know, they don't go around tidying up or cleaning up. If you can't get to the scene, then you're hampered. At least try and get some photographs of it, or there may be CCTV. You know, ultimately you're going to go with what you've got, but ideally get to the scene. Or if you can't get to it, can you freeze that scene? Can a senior manager take charge and make certain that nothing is moved? I mean, move the casualty by all means, but you don't move anything that was involved. So everything is in their right perspective, right positions with regard to each other, and then maybe you can get to the scene later on. It's not the best way of doing it, but you know, that's the real world. You can't always do it as in the textbook. You might improvise.
Fantastic. Are we okay to carry on? We've still got more questions. They're still coming through. Are we okay to continue with the questions? Yep. Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so Orset is asking, is it possible during the interview to present the person being interviewed with the facts in order to come out with the right conclusion?
I'd be careful there presenting the facts. You might do later on once you've got their story out. The point is you want their story as they recall it, their version of events as they recall it. Story is the wrong word to use. That implies they made it up. But their version, their understanding of what happened, you want to get that straight from them without influencing it. Now, once you've got that out in phase one where the witness talks, you can then go back to other evidence and say, you said this, but what about there was a suggestion that that might have happened? Does that ring a bell with you? And you can tease it out that way. But initially, you want their, if you like, their unblemished recollection of what happened. And then you can start putting things to them later on, especially if it turns out they're lying and you've got to challenge. That's unusual. You know, people don't always lie. But it's always best to get their evidence first and then work on that, compare that to what you got from other people.
Brilliant, brilliant. So Graham Coyle is asking, is it acceptable to carry out an interview by phone or Teams or Zoom, particularly if the injured person can't attend work?
Yeah, I mean, if it was an injured person, then first thing I would do is check that medically they're allowed to do this. You don't want to put them under stress. But as long as their doctors have got no objection, if you can do it in person, that's ideal. If you can go to the hospital and visit them at the hospital bed, that's great. But if you can't, you've got to do it by telephone, so be it. You know, it's again, it's the imperfect world, and you go with what you've got. And it may be you get an interview with them and a statement from them initially while they're in hospital. Then maybe, depending on how things develop, you might want to re-interview them when they're ready to come back to work or when they're convalescing at home, to go round, go through what was said, anything else spring to mind, and try and develop the interview. So it's a case of go with what you've got, and you can't always do it as per the textbook. It's the real world.
Yeah. So how many interviewers are the maximum for interviewing a witness? So what's the maximum number of interviewers you would have for one witness?
I would normally go on a one-to-one basis. You might want to have a second interviewer with you if they are taking notes, for example, but ideally, I think one-to-one. Sometimes the police do a 2-to-1, but one leads and one takes notes. But if you start getting 3, 4, 5, you end up with an interview panel. It's going to get confusing. It's intimidating. I don't think it's the best way of doing things. But certainly one-to-one should work. Maybe if you've got, say, you need specialist advice on something, then you might have an investigator with you who has that specialist knowledge, but one of you will be the lead interviewer. The other one will support as and when required. But it's really one witness talking to one person is what you're looking for.
Okay, brilliant. And I've got a question from Ben. If you intend to go back for further information, do you have to inform the interviewee? And do you think that would enable them to potentially fabricate some of their statement?
Again, I think that's judgment. If you think there's something not quite right, then you may want to keep your cards close to your chest, let them think you've finished, and then you take them almost by surprise. Or it may be helpful to say, look, you know, there's a lot of unanswered questions. I may well have to come back to you. I think it depends upon the tactics that you want to develop during the interview. For ordinary, well, the 99% of people who don't lie, it does no harm to say, that's great. If we need anything more, I'll come back to you. If you've got somebody you're not certain about, then you've got to think tactically. If I let him know what I'm thinking, is he going to start putting a story together, or shall I let him go away thinking he's got away with it? So this is just the 1%, that the liars, that you have to be a bit tactical about it. I once used the expression, I think I'd used it, Kareem. In that case, that sort of interview, it's playing verbal chess with a poker face. Because they're trying to find out what you know, you're not giving the game away. So you may or may not want to tell them what the next move is, depending upon how they sit in the game.
Lovely. So we're going to go to the last question. There are a few more, but I will send them separately.
Okay.
So during an interview, and it appears that there's evidence of a failed process, should the recommendations to prevent reoccurrence be discussed during that interview with the subject?
Yeah, I mean, it would. I don't see why not. I mean, if they are the operator who uses that process, and the process has let them down in some way, then of course they've got the best knowledge of what actually went wrong. So it's best to talk to them rather than me try and work it out. They're the expert because they use it. You know, it didn't do what it was meant to do because this happened or shouldn't have happened. Fine, get them to talk you through that, because they are, at that point, they're the expert in that system. Yeah.
Fantastic. Lovely. Brilliant. I think it was really interesting, Andy, and we had a huge number of questions come through. So as I said, I will make sure we share them. There are a few more that haven't quite been answered, but what we'll do is we'll contact people directly, I think, in the next couple of days to answer their questions directly. So Kareem, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone who attends our branch meeting, and feel free, as I'm saying usually, to bring on your wider networks who want to be educated, give them the opportunity to learn and attend our future events. Also, I need to thank you, Andy, for accepting our invitation for today's meeting and for sharing your experience with attendees.
My pleasure.
Also, thank you, Donna. Yeah. Also, thank you, Donna, for facilitating this meeting. Yeah. So, thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kareem.